On a chilly Halloween night in 1974, the unimaginable happened. 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien was excited to trick or treat with his family, unaware that his Halloween would end in tragedy. What should have been a night of joy became a horror story, as Timothy fell victim to one of the most infamous crimes of the century, orchestrated by his own father. The tragedy shocked the nation and left a dark legacy on Halloween celebrations, as parents everywhere started to look at Halloween candy with suspicion and fear. On a chilly Halloween night in 1974, little Timothy O'Brien was filled with excitement as he dressed up and went trick-or-treating with his father. Ronald O'Brien, his father, seemed like any other parent, standing by as Timothy and his sister eagerly collected candy from neighbors. As the night went on, the O'Brien children knocked on doors, their bags growing heavy with sugary treasures, oblivious to the danger awaiting them. At one particular house, the porch light was off, a sign most children would recognize to move along, but Ronald insisted they wait. After a brief moment, Ronald returned with several pixie sticks, a rare treat that made the children's eyes light up. Excitedly, Timothy held onto the colorful straw of sugar, completely unaware that it was laced with a deadly dose of cyanide. Later that night, at home, Timothy begged his dad to let him have just one more piece of candy before bed. Smiling, Ronald handed him the poisoned pixie sticks, sealing his son's tragic fate. The sugary powder tasted bitter, and Timothy quickly complained to his father, clutching his stomach in pain. Within moments, Timothy was violently ill, collapsing as his body was overtaken by the poison. His parents rushed him to the hospital, his small frame trembling as the poison worked swiftly. Despite the doctor's best efforts, Timothy O'Brien was pronounced dead. His young life ended far too soon. News of Timothy's death sent shockwaves through the community. A Halloween poisoning was every parent's nightmare. At first, police believed it was the work of a disturbed stranger, a maniac targeting children on Halloween night. But as they dug deeper, they found disturbing inconsistencies in Ronald's story, cracks that soon led to a chilling realization. Ronald had recently taken out life insurance policies on both of his children, raising suspicions about his intentions. Investigators uncovered that he was deeply in debt, a desperate man looking for a way out, willing to sacrifice his own son for money. As details emerged, the community was gripped by horror. A father was behind the poison that had stolen Timothy's life. In the days that followed, Ronald's behavior became erratic, often seen crying in front of cameras, but some sensed something was off. Friends and neighbors began to recall odd comments he had made, comments that now took on a sinister meaning. The evidence against him was mounting, a trail of decisions and purchases that painted a picture of a man willing to commit the unthinkable. When police examined the remaining pixie sticks Ronald had handed out, they found that they, too, were laced with poison. Miraculously, no other children had consumed them, sparing the community from an even greater tragedy. Ronald's trial would become one of the most notorious in Texas, a chilling account of betrayal, greed, and the loss of innocence. As Ronald O'Brien stood trial, the courtroom was filled with a mixture of grief and anger, disbelief that a father could commit such an act. Prosecutors argued that he saw his children as nothing more than a means to financial gain, a plan born out of desperation and greed. Witnesses recounted Ronald's debt and his obsession with the life insurance payouts, creating a damning case against him. Ronald, however, continued to maintain his innocence, insisting he loved his children and would never harm them. But as the evidence piled up, his facade began to crumble, revealing a man consumed by his own selfish motives. The jury listened in stunned silence as they heard how meticulously Ronald had planned the murder, each detail revealing his sinister intentions. In a dramatic turn, the prosecutor produced the remaining poisoned pixie sticks as evidence, a powerful symbol of the horror Ronald had unleashed. The sight of the deadly candy brought many to tears, a stark reminder of the innocence Timothy had lost. Ronald's defense team attempted to portray him as a victim, but the public saw through the facade, recognizing the cold calculation behind his actions. As the jury delivered a guilty verdict, the weight of Ronald's betrayal fell over the courtroom, a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking behind closed doors. Sentenced to death, Ronald O'Brien became known as the Candy Man, a title that would forever haunt his legacy. Halloween would never be the same again, as parents across the country began to question the safety of their children's treats. In the years that followed, Timothy's tragic death transformed Halloween, casting a dark shadow over a night once filled with joy. Parents began checking candy, fearing the possibility of tainted treats, a legacy of fear born from Ronald's actions. Timothy O'Brien's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the trust we place in those closest to us. Each year, as Halloween approaches, stories of Timothy's tragedy resurface, a haunting reminder of innocence betrayed. The legend of the poisoned candy persists, a fear that grows stronger with each generation, keeping Timothy's memory alive. Ronald's actions left an indelible scar on the community, changing the way people viewed Halloween and their own neighbors. Though Ronald's life ended with his execution, the impact of his crime lingered, a story passed down to warn others of hidden dangers. Timothy's name became forever linked with Halloween, a tragic reminder of a night meant for laughter, turned to sorrow. The myth of poisoned Halloween candy became a dark legend, rooted in the very real tragedy of a young boy's life. Even decades later, the story of Timothy O'Brien is retold, his short life a somber warning of betrayal in the most unexpected places.
Okay, so, Halloween's right around the corner, and we always got to do a spooky story this time of year. But this one isn't just spooky, it's true crime, and it changed how everyone does Halloween forever. It's the tragic story of Timothy O'Brien.
Yeah.
He was this little boy who died on Halloween night in 1974 after eating poison candy. And here's the thing, it wasn't some random stranger out there,
This is every parent's worst nightmare. Because the person responsible was someone Timothy should have been able to trust, completely.
No doubt. So,
yeah.
Let's rewind back to that Halloween night, 1974 in Deer Park, Texas. So Timothy's out trick-or-treating with his dad, Ronald, and his sister, Elizabeth. He's pretty normal, like a typical Halloween. But then they get to this one house and the porch lights off.
Most kids know that's a universal sign for no candy, right? But Ronald, he makes them wait. And a little while later, he comes back out with a handful of pixie sticks, which, back then, pixie sticks, that was a big score.
Oh yeah, for sure. Big time. And so later that night, Timothy eats one of those pixie sticks.
Sure.
And it's the candy that ends up killing him. We're talking cyanide poisoning here, which is, as you can imagine, it's incredibly fast acting and it's really painful.
It's just awful. So Timothy, he starts complaining that the candy tastes bitter and fix. Almost immediately, he's violently ill. He collapses. And even though they rushed him to the hospital, there's nothing they could do.
It's heartbreaking. So you can imagine the fear, just absolute terror that gripped this whole community. A child attacked on Halloween night, and everyone just assumed it was. It had to be some like deranged stranger, targeting trick-or-treaters. But that's where this is where it gets really dark really fast.
Yeah, as the police started investigating, they started noticing little things about Ronald's story, inconsistencies that just didn't add up.
Okay, so like what kind of details? What were the red flags that really started popping up?
Well, one of the first things was just Ronald's behavior after, in the aftermath of Timothy's death. He was strangely calm, almost detached. Like it just wasn't the reaction you'd expect from a grieving father.
Yeah, that's not how most parents would react. They'd be beside themselves. That's a huge red flag right there.
Yeah.
So what else? What else did they find?
Well, they found out that Ronald had just not long before Timothy's death, he'd taken out life insurance policies on both his kids. And we're not talking about like small amounts of money here. It was a lot of money.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And this is where it starts getting really creepy,
Yeah.
It turns out that Ronald was having really bad money problems, like drowning in debt, looking for any way out.
Yeah, and it definitely makes those life insurance policies seem like they weren't just a coincidence, like it was all part of some plan.
So we're not talking about some random act of violence here.
Sure.
It's starting to look more and more like a BEM.
Yeah.
Like a calculated thing, planned out.
Yeah.
What do you think? Driven by desperation, greed.
It's hard to say. It's hard to say for sure, but the pieces are definitely starting to fit together. The money problems, the insurance policies, his weird behavior, and then there's the cyanide.
Yeah, cyanide, you're right. We can't gloss over that. Where did it even come from?
Well, that's one of the things that's so chilling about this whole case. Ronald actually worked as a chemist at an optical company.
Wait a minute, a chemist? So he had access to this deadly poison.
He did.
Oh, wow.
And that completely changes the whole investigation. Suddenly, it's not just a grieving father acting a little strange, It's a man with a motive, the means, and the opportunity.
This was not a random attack. This was planned.
Seems like it. And there's one more thing that really seals it.
Yeah.
The police found more poisoned pixie sticks.
Go on. There were more.
Yeah. Ronald had given out other cyanide-laced candy to other kids that night. Thankfully, none of those kids ate the poison candy.
That's just unthinkable.
Yeah. But it was the final piece of the puzzle for the investigators. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't, some random contamination. This was planned.
Ronald O'Brien, Timothy's own father, was the one who poisoned his son. The one person Timothy should have been able to trust the most.
A betrayal of the worst kind.
All for money. It's hard to even wrap your head around that.
Almost impossible to comprehend.
This deep dive just took a really dark turn. And I have a feeling it's going to get even darker from here.
I know, right? It's just, how could a father do that to his own son? For money.
I mean, it's just awful. But as hard as it is to think about, we got to talk about what happened next. I mean, the trial of Ronald O'Brien, that was a huge deal, right? I think national news, everyone was watching, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It was a media circus. Like the whole country was glued to the TV waiting to see if he'd get what he deserved.
Can you imagine being in the courtroom?
Yeah.
The tension, the grief, the anger, it must have been intense. So what was the prosecution's main argument? How'd they try to prove he was guilty?
Well, they focused on the evidence. And there was a lot of it. They presented all the details of Ronald's money problems, like very carefully, showed the jury his bank statements, credit card bills, everything.
So they were painting a picture of a man who was desperate, a man who might do anything to get out of debt.
Exactly. And then they brought in those life insurance policies, the ones he took out on his kids like just weeks before Timothy died. They even had handwriting experts analyze the documents to prove it was Ronald's signature.
And those poison pixie sticks, I mean. That had to be a key piece of evidence, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, can you imagine being there, seeing those poison candies presented as evidence? They had forensic experts explain how the cyanide was mixed in, how lethal it was, even in small amounts. They even showed how the pixie sticks could be opened and resealed without it being obvious.
So they were really building a strong case, showing he had motive, means, and opportunity. What about Ronald's defense? What did they say to all that?
Well, they tried to say the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no direct proof Ronald actually poisoned the candy. They tried to make him look like a grieving father being wrongly accused, a victim of circumstance.
Did anyone buy that? Seriously. I mean, come on. The guy had access to cyanide. He was drowning in debt. And then there's those life insurance policies.
Well, the prosecution, they were ready for that. They called witnesses who had overheard Ronald saying weird things about needing money, almost like he was hinting at what was going to happen, And they had neighbors who saw him acting suspicious on Halloween night. Plus, they brought up his, like, creepy calmness after Timothy died.
Yeah, that behavior, that was a big red flag. Most parents would be devastated, hysterical even, but he was just like calm.
Yeah, like it was like almost eerie, and I think that really stuck with the jury. It just didn't fit the image of a grieving father.
So what happened? Did the jury believe Ronald's story?
Nope, not at all. After deliberating for a few days, they found Ronald O'Brien guilty of capital murder.
Wow. Guilty. A moment of truth. What's the sentence?
Death. When the judge sentenced him, he called the crime a calculated, cold-blooded act, motivated purely by greed.
And that's how Ronald O'Brien became the Candyman, a name that still gives me chills. So what happened next? Did he appeal?
Yeah, he did. He spent almost a decade on death row trying to appeal his sentence. But every appeal was denied. Finally, in March of 1984, 10 years to the day after that awful Halloween night, he was executed by lethal injection.
Wow. So justice was served. But of course, it didn't bring Timothy back. In this case, it wasn't just about the verdict. It had a much bigger impact. It changed how we celebrate Halloween forever. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It became a national phenomenon. I mean, it just tapped into some of our deepest fears, right? Like the idea that even Halloween candy could be dangerous.
Yeah. My parents used to check my candy so carefully after trick-or-treating. It felt like everyone was doing it.
For sure. It became a ritual for a lot of families. I mean, parents were terrified, and the media coverage didn't help. Every newspaper and TV news was talking about tainted candy and Halloween dangers.
It's interesting, though, because
Statistically speaking, the chances of getting poisoned Halloween candy are super low. There have only been a few cases, and even fewer where someone actually meant to hurt someone.
that's true. But you know how it is. Perception is often more powerful than reality, especially when it comes to keeping our kids safe. Timothy's story. Even though it's just one case, it really impacted how we think about Halloween.
It's a reminder of how one awful act, one man's desperation and cruelty can have, like ripple effects that spread far and wide and change behaviors and traditions for generations to come.
It's true, and it brings up an important question, right? How could someone, a seemingly normal person, cross that line into such darkness?
I know, it's like Ronald O'Brien wasn't some monster hiding in the shadows. He was a father, a neighbor, someone who probably blended in with everyone else. But somewhere along the line, something went wrong.
That's what we need to understand. What pushes someone to that breaking point? What are the societal pressures, the psychological factors that can lead to something so horrific? That's a tough question. But I think it's one we need to ask, especially around Halloween. When we think about our fears, real and imagined, we've talked about all the facts of the case and how it changed Halloween, but there's something else here. Like, this case really makes you think about human nature.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, how can a seemingly normal person do something so evil?
It's almost worse. Because Ronald O'Brien wasn't like some obvious villain. He was a father, a neighbor, someone who just blended in. But underneath it all, he was willing to sacrifice his own son for money.
Yeah, it's really scary because it makes you question everyone, you know? Like the people we trust, the people who are supposed to protect us. It shatters the idea that evil is easy to spot, that it hides in the shadows. Sometimes it's right there in front of us, hiding in plain sight.
It's unsettling for sure. It reminds us that evil can be closer than we think.
When you think about the bigger picture, Timothy's story raises questions about society too. Like, how much does financial pressure play a role in pushing people to do extreme things?
That's a good question.
Yeah. What can we do as a society to help people who are struggling before they get to that breaking point?
It makes you wonder, right? Like, individual choices obviously matter, but the circumstances surrounding those choices are important too.
Exactly. This case, it's about one horrible act. But it also makes us think about the bigger problems that might contribute to this kind of desperation, like the systems that fail people who need help.
It's a lot to consider, and there aren't easy answers.
Yeah.
But these are important questions, especially as we get closer to Halloween, a time when we think about our fears.
Yeah, I agree. While cases like Timothy's are rare, they're a reminder to be cautious, to trust our gut feelings.
And to remember that even the safest places can be vulnerable.
Exactly.
I think it's important to remember Timothy, to honor his memory by talking about safety, about trust, and about how complex human behavior can be.
For sure.
Even though it's a sad story. It can help us be more aware and understanding.
Definitely.
We can still enjoy Halloween, but we should acknowledge that there are still dangers out there. We can celebrate, But we should also be mindful of protecting our kids and each other. This deep dive, it's been heartbreaking, but really important. It's made us confront some hard truths about the world and ourselves. So as you're out this Halloween, remember Timothy O'Brien's story. Let it remind you to be careful, be kind, and appreciate the joy and connection that Halloween brings. Thanks for joining us in the Yay!